Well, hey there. It's your old buddy Dan back from Beach Church with another message. First of all, I want to thank the good people at Beach Church for allowing us to stand on this platform to deliver these words, especially Pastor Jimmy, who does such a great job of leading that body. We just thank all of y'all for all that you do. Well, today we're in the first book of Samuel, chapters 13 through 15. Chapter 13 begins with what would become the standard description of a king appointed to rule God's chosen people. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, Scripture records, and he reigned over Israel for 42 years. It seemed like the natural choice. After all, when we are introduced to Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 9, we are told Saul was the most handsome man in Israel, head and shoulders taller than anyone else in the land. When Samuel encounters Saul, the Lord exclaims, "That's the man I told you about. He will rule my people." As we can see, just as Saul takes the throne, Israel would immediately become, quote-unquote, obnoxious to the Philistines. His son Jonathan had attacked one of their outposts. Although we will soon see how courageous Jonathan is, Scripture says that the troops Saul would assemble to defend Israel from the Philistines would quake with fear. Many would desert. For the first time, Saul seems to feel vulnerable. Turns out, being king is a pretty tough gig. Recall that in 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 8, Samuel had instructed Saul go down to Gilgal, where Samuel would join him to, quote-unquote, sacrifice burnt offerings and peace offerings. Samuel was explicit that Saul must wait for 7 days until he arrives and gives Saul further instructions. But Saul doesn't wait. Fearing the worst, he offers up those sacrifices. When Samuel sees that, he rebukes Saul. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you," Samuel tells him. "If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time." This was only the first of Saul's offenses. Saul was not without his reasons. He notes that the Philistines were getting ready to attack. His men were deserting him, that Samuel was late. Gotta admit, that's a lot of pressure. I might feel compelled to make that offering myself to seek the Lord's favor. After all, the text would go on to reveal that not a soldier with Saul and Jonathan had a sword or spear in his hand. The Philistines made sure of that, economically sabotaging Israel's blacksmiths, putting them out of business. War by another means. It's one of those impossible moments. It seems like we've all been there. We might find ourselves down to our last pennies, not knowing how we're going to feed our kids. We turn to the Lord in desperation, and even so, we must sometimes wait. It's uncomfortable, but we learn that God is never late. He's always on time. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16 to 17 says, "All Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be completely equipped for every good work." Here in 1 Samuel, the Lord is rebuking Saul through the word of his prophet. Moving into chapter 14, we see the courage of Jonathan. Undeterred, given his faith that the Lord would deliver them, he and his armor-bearer strike panic into the whole of the Philistine army. Saul, his army, even the men who had deserted the cause, pursue the Philistines. Scripture concludes, on that day, the Lord saved Israel. Even though they had slaughtered the Philistines, we note that Saul had made a vow that no one should eat until Saul had avenged himself on his enemies. Centuries earlier in Deuteronomy chapter 25 verse 4, Moses instructs, "Do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain." Just as that ox should be allowed a share in the harvest it creates, so too should these soldiers have been fed. And not for nothing, centuries later, in chapter 10, verse 7 of his gospel, Luke records the instruction of Jesus, the Word made flesh, who says, "The worker deserves his wages." Unaware of Saul's vow, having separated from the camp, Jonathan takes some honey, and though Saul resolves to put Jonathan to death for this act of defiance, his men will not allow it. "As surely as the Lord lives," they insist, "not a hair of his head will fall to the ground. For he did this today with God's help." Note that Jonathan received the Lord's justice in accordance with the word. Moving into chapter 15, the Lord instructs Saul to completely wipe out the Amalekites. Recall that Deuteronomy chapter 25 verse 19 concludes, "You must wipe out Amalek so completely that no one will remember they ever lived." If you remember back in Exodus 17, the Amalekites attacked the Israelites as they came out of Egypt, picking off those lagging behind, too tired to keep up with the others. As you may imagine, the Lord found this a grievous act. He asked Saul to avenge his ancestors, and the Lord delivers the Amalekites into Saul's hands, as you would expect, but it seems that Saul spares the best of their sheep, cattle, fatted calves, and lambs, their king, and evidently many of his people. Given the text here in chapter 15, one might assume that only the king and some livestock survived, but later on in 1 Samuel chapter 30, we note that David is still struggling with the Amalekites. Saul evidently had spared many. The Lord shares his regret with Samuel that he ever allowed Saul to be king. Making matters worse, when Samuel seeks Saul out, Saul has been busy setting up a monument to himself. After all, he had attacked the Amalekites, taken their king prisoner, and his men plundered their livestock, supposedly to make sacrifices unto the Lord. Even if that's true, that's not what the Lord had instructed. As Samuel makes clear, the Father is more interested in obedience than sacrifice. The Lord was looking for a king who would stand in the gap when the armies surrounded, stand up to his men when he needed to, and ultimately stand for the justice of the Father. Well, that's all there is for today. I do appreciate the time and attention you give us to watch these videos.